Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Alastair Stewart, who's a senior consultant here at URM as well as a QSA. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today, Alastair and I are going to be talking about the impact of AI on the payment card industry data security standard, or PCI DSS. So just to start things off, Alastair, I think I'm going to sort of go back to basics with you a little bit. So what is the PCI DSS?
Of course, yes. It's always handy to start at the beginning. It's essentially it's a nearly 20-year-old standard now that the major credit card brands came up with to help standardize securing card data so that you didn't have to meet different payment brands, you didn't have to meet different security standards. There was one standard for securing cards to make it nice and easier. They created the standard, they built 12 high-level requirements with hundreds of sub-requirements underneath it to help organizations work out what they need to do to secure credit card and debit card information, covering everything from network security, vulnerability management, patching, staff training, physical security, policy, suppliers, absolutely everything you could think of that might need to be covered to secure credit card information. And in contrast to a lot of other standards, especially when it was created, and even so now, it's very prescriptive in what you should do, and it's very technical in what you should do. It's less focused on policy and more focused on actual security technical requirements and having firewalls, having security systems in place rather than simply having a policy that says we should do this. Although it does have the policies in it, it's more focused on technical side of things.
And who has to comply?
So it applies to any organization that wants to acquire credit or debit card transactions on cards from any of the 6 payment brands that are signed up to the standard. That's Visa, MasterCard, and Amex pretty much across Europe. But if you're outside of Europe, it'll also apply to things like JCB and Discover and even Union Pay over in Japan. So any cards of those brands, any data of those cards is protected by the PCI DSS, and any organization that's involved in securing that card data during its transactions. Doesn't necessarily have to be the merchant who's making the transaction. It could be some kind of service provider, some kind of other provider of services that secures that data during the transaction. It will also apply to them. And they're specifically interested in the actual card information, so the 16-digit card number, the name, expiry date, CVV2, PIN, all that kind of stuff, the security information that's used to actually process the transaction with. So wherever that exists, any organization that's protecting it is most likely going to fall under PCI DSS or one of the sister standards that's associated with it.
So this is a bit of a big question, but just at a high level, how do you comply?
Yeah, that is a big question. But yeah, broadly speaking, compliance is enforced or required by the acquiring bank. So if you're a merchant and you want to acquire transactions, they'll require you to apply the standard and meet the standard. Or perhaps you're providing services to a merchant that needs to meet the standard, so they'll want you to meet the standard. And there's 2 key ways you can assess. It's an annual assessment, and you can either self-assess or you can have an external assessment by a QSA such as ourselves. Which one you have will largely be determined on the risk you present to the card data. So the number of card transactions that you handle annually, the more transactions you handle, the greater risk you are, and so the more likely you are for the banks to require you to have an external assessment. Also, if you've previously had a breach and some card data has been stolen, they're liable to want you to have external assessments. And broadly speaking, what you need to do is you need to identify where the standard applies, so the scope of applicability. You then need to identify which requirements apply to that scope, and then confirm through evidence reviews and stuff that you're meeting those requirements that apply. And it's an annual process, so you go through it every year.
So just to look a bit more specifically at AI and PCI DSS now, what use cases are there for AI within PCI DSS?
So this is a sort of broad question that has come up quite a few times by some of our clients, because obviously AI is being thrown at everything and seeing what it sticks at these days. But what you really have to do is go back to what does AI do? What is it good at? And what is it currently being used for within all the current use cases? And broadly speaking, it's essentially a way of enhancing existing algorithms. So to give algorithms learning capabilities so they can improve themselves, they can get better at themselves. It also has capabilities for being able to react to situations that the original algorithm wasn't programmed to react to. So when you look at using algorithms, especially on large data sets, AI is very good at passing large amounts of data through and picking out specifics or picking out situations that won't necessarily be seen by a human or correlations that can't be seen by a human. And so in any scenario where that's what you're doing, you're passing large sets of data and you're using algorithms to pick out specific scenarios or look for specific things, AI is going to work very, very well with those. Also in situations where you want to be able to react to an unknown situation, to something that you don't necessarily have an algorithm deal with, you haven't necessarily programmed to deal with, and the AI can use previous experience of its workings to react to that. Those are situations where it works very, very well. And those do crop up within the PCI DSS. Those do crop up within security in general.
So what areas can AI enhance?
Within PCI DSS, there's 3 or 4 key areas where it's already being deployed, to be honest with you. Threat detection is one. So a lot of anti-malware or antivirus solutions over the past 4 or 5 years have been deploying AI learning algorithms to better detect threats within them, to better pick up on viruses and malware, rather than simply having a list of all known malware and scanning and looking for it. They're looking for code that looks malicious. So they're running the code, working out what the code does and working out whether that code is malicious or not without actually having a list of whether it is. So those tools have been around for a while now. They've got better and better, and they're deployed within PCI DSS because it's anti-malware, it's anti-threat detection. Sort of alongside that, you've then got logging and monitoring is a big area for PCI DSS in terms of logging what's going on your network, what are people doing, what are users doing, and working out whether they're doing the right thing, whether they're doing unusual stuff. And so recently we've seen a lot of these security event management tools integrate AI learning into them to be able to teach the algorithms what is normal behavior and look for abnormal behavior, look for unusual behavior on the network and with network traffic. We've seen it integrated into access control with something called zero trust architecture, which is now accepted under PCI DSS as a valid way of doing access control, which is essentially nobody has access to anything, and every time somebody wants to access something, the system evaluates whether that person should get access to that system at that particular time. And it uses AI algorithms to pass through the data and go, well, what does this person want to do? Why do they want to do it? Where are they doing it? When are they doing it? And make a decision based on that information whether they should have access or not. That way nobody gets any access, and each access is individual per request. And that's a lot of data to pass, and so AI is working very well to be able to pass that data and do it. So these kinds of new access control systems are coming into play under PCI DSS. And the third area we've seen it creeping in is in actual vulnerability management. So there's a lot of scanning and pen testing going on under PCI DSS to find vulnerabilities, and that can create a lot of data that needs to be interpreted to work out whether there are actual vulnerabilities or not. And AI is being brought into those tools to help determine whether the results are pass or fail, to determine actual risk. Because if you have a vulnerability, just because the vulnerability exists doesn't mean it's a high risk vulnerability. So to be able to assess whether that vulnerability presents a risk to your network based on what your network is doing is another large amount of data that the AI can pass through. So we've seen it deployed because the tools that do those jobs are using AI to do it. So that's where it's come into PCI DSS, that's where it's been able to essentially enhance the capabilities of those tools that are already being used.
Amazing, thank you, Alastair. So looking now at assessments and where AI can come in with assessments, can AI be used to perform your assessment?
Short answer to that is no. The PCI Council has recently published some guidance on using AI within assessments and PCI DSS because it's an area that's come up, so they've passed some judgment. And essentially their guidance is that AI is a tool, it's not an assessor, it's not a compliance thing, it's a tool to enhance assessments and enhance compliance. And that's pretty much how AI should be treated in general by the public. It's a tool to do things with, it's not a be-all and end-all, and it's not a replacement for anything. So what they don't want is using AI to interpret the requirements and whether they're met or not. They don't want it to be performing inspections. They don't want it to be making any decisions about your compliance. They want AI to be deployed within assessments to enhance what the assessor is already doing, to be able to use the tool to make assessments quicker and easier in terms of passing through those large volumes of data we talked about. As an assessor, you often have to look through reams and reams of policies to make sure they've got the right policies in place, or you have to look through large volumes of log data to get the right examples of logs and incidents and stuff. And it's there where it should be used as a tool to make that job easier, rather than you manually having to look for all this information you're trying to find amongst the mass of data you can get sometimes when it comes to assessments.
Absolutely. I think that's a good way of looking at it, is it's a tool, not a replacement.
Yes.
I think that can apply in so many other areas as well. Amazing. Thank you, Alastair. So can AI help with evidence collection?
Yes, it definitely can. It does depend entirely on the volume of evidence you're collecting and what that evidence is. So when we talked about logging information, which is where it's used heavily, it can be used to pass over all the logs within the sample and pick out specific events or specific types of logs that you want to validate that those logs exist and are being monitored. Often we'll go through large numbers of change control tickets when we're looking at change control and patch management, and we want to make sure that those tickets fit a certain format and there's certain information within those tickets. So we could use AI to pass all those tickets through and check that each one has the relevant information on it and pick out any exceptions or anomalies that don't match the pattern. It can do that very easily. You just have to be careful when you're assessing, because as assessors ourselves, and if you're doing your own internal assessments, you should be sampling rather than passing all the data through, because it's both difficult or impossible to do that. And when you are selecting samples, it's hard to get the AI to choose a sample with the correct rationale. So it may need assistance in selecting the sample to look at, because you want to make sure the sample is both random and representative of the overall population. So if your population is split 60-40 between two different types of systems, your sample should be split 60-40, and it's not always easy for an AI to know that or to be able to do that. So you need to be careful when evidencing. You need to make sure that as an assessor, you have oversight on what that tool is doing, that it's actually producing you representative evidence and representative samples, rather than just randomly picking out a bunch of stuff that doesn't actually represent what the environment is you're looking at.
No, that makes sense. Are there any other ways it can help?
So yes, I mentioned zero trust architecture is something that PCI DSS brought in as brand new acceptable access control versions within the new version 4 of the standard. Something else they introduced in version 4, which we've talked about on some of our blogs and other media, is customized validation. So it's a brand new way for a organization to meet the requirements, rather than simply going, well, the requirement says do this, so I do that. They find new and innovative ways to meet those requirements. So each requirement has an objective. It says the objective of this requirement is to do achieve this result. So you might find a new way of meeting that same result without actually doing what the requirement tells you to do. And what you might find is that you find a way of meeting 5 or 6 different requirements with one tool or with one system, and AI systems are liable to fit in that gap very easily. So it's quite expected that we will find AI security systems that can meet large numbers of PCI DSS requirements with a single system and a single way of doing things. So the zero trust architecture one could greatly assist with the security event monitoring, because it's meaning that users can't do everything they used to do. So it means you're actually only monitoring certain types of user traffic rather than all of it. So that one tool is not only doing access control, it's now doing logging and monitoring as well. And that would perfectly fit the customized validation, because you're meeting the requirements and you're meeting the objectives and the risk reduction, but you're not doing it the way the standard says. And so you would validate it in a new customized way. So we haven't had that come up yet in any of our assessments, because it's still very, very new, the customized validations, but it's certainly where we see some of our clients are going, well, hang on, we've got this interesting new security tool that we want to use. How do we make it meet the requirements? Well, we do it via a customized validation, so that you can have one tool meets 10, 15 different requirements in one go. That takes a bit of work to document and to assess, but long term, that could make compliance a lot easier for businesses by wrapping all a bunch of security requirements up into a single validation rather than 45 different requirements or whatever it is. So yeah, it certainly will be helping in that area, I think.
Just building on that, do you think AI security systems are going to be required by PCI DSS in the future?
That's incredibly unlikely, mostly because PCI DSS remains technology agnostic. They're very adamant that the standard doesn't dictate any specific technologies you need to meet requirements. They simply say, we want you to do this, and how you do it is up to you. So much so that in version 4 of the standard, they moved away from using the term firewall to using the phrase network security control, because they don't want to say you have to have a firewall. What you have to be doing is controlling the traffic that flows around your network, and you do that with a security control. That could be a firewall, and most likely will be, but there might be other things that could do the same job. So they're never going to turn around and say you need an AI security tool to do this. But what's liable to happen is what's happened in the past, that certain tools become so good at certain jobs that it becomes the sort of de facto standard for dealing with that security control. And therefore, it means you always end up using it. And the place we're seeing that certainly at the moment is in that threat detection, the anti-malware. AI is becoming de facto standard for anti-malware software. So rather than having traditional scanning tools with lists of viruses that they look for, we're now using AI algorithms to monitor and detect viruses in real time without having lists. And that's now becoming the de facto standard. So the best way to meet the anti-malware requirements is to use an AI enhanced anti-malware assistance tool. It's just because that's the best thing we've got until something new comes along. So while it's not going to be required, it ends up being what you do because that's the way the industry works. That's the industry standard for dealing with that problem.
Do you think AI could ever remove the need for compliance with PCI DSS?
Because I'll be out of a job if it does. I don't want that to happen. No, it's probably not. No, because as we said before, AI is a tool designed to enhance existing security features and security practices. It can't possibly cover everything the PCI DSS covers. I don't see how AI can cover physical security or staff training or that kind of stuff. It's not going to cover that. And ultimately, it's always going to need human oversight to make sure it's doing its job properly. As with any computer system, even advanced AI, if you put junk in, you get junk out. It works the same as any other computer program. So it's a tool to enhance security. The PCI DSS guidance says it needs to have human oversight. If you're using AI in your assessments, you need to make sure that humans are validating that the AI is producing sensible results from whatever it is you're asking it to do, to make sure you're not just relying on the tool blindly and going, of course it must be correct. We can't assume it's correct. We can often see examples in the press of AI giving crazy answers or doing ridiculous things when the algorithm just pops something out of nowhere that nobody has any idea where it came from. So yeah, it's not going to take my job, fortunately, thankfully. It's going to be a tool to enhance and make my life easier and hopefully make our clients' lives easier to be able to comply.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Alastair. And for any of our listeners that want to read up a bit on this topic, Alastair's written an excellent blog on our website called The Impact of AI on PCI DSS Compliance. So do go and check that out, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.